In the military, building resilience is not just a nice to have, it's a necessity. In today's video, we will discuss the 4 pillars of resilience to help you stay mission ready in your life, no matter which challenges come your way. Hey guys, welcome to the High Ground. My name is Fabio, and today we're talking about resiliency. Over the last 20 years or so, we have learned a great many lessons about resiliency from the military, from the experiences in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in many other places in the world. Today, let's discuss these lessons and see where they can help us in our daily life. But first, what is resiliency? Generally said, resiliency is the ability to recover from and adapt to challenges. Now let me give you some statistics and numbers why you should have resiliency. According to the American Physiological Association, individuals with higher levels of resiliency are up to 6 times less likely to develop depression or anxiety disorders. Now, this is already quite substantial. If we look at other studies, for example, from the National Institute of Health or the World Health Organization themselves, they all overwhelmingly confirm that resiliency keeps us from falling into depression, falling into anxiety. And given that the same World Health Organization predicts that by 2030, depression will be the leading disability worldwide. I mean, everybody who knows people with depression, right, knows that it's not a joke, it's not bad mood. And given this statistics, we can actually see how important it is to build our resiliency. Another article that I found from the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine, in this article they reported that building resiliency at the community level can lead to reduced economic losses from disasters and other crises. Well, that's clear so far, but the numbers are quite impressive. For every dollar spent on disaster risk reduction and higher resiliency of the community, up to $7 in future disaster response and recovery costs can be saved. So you have basically you get 7 times the juice for once the squeeze. I found that this is quite impressive, and it shows that resiliency has different sides to it. One, the more mental side, but also a very real preparedness side. Now, in the current system that is used in the military and by many militaries around the world, we distinguish between 4 different types of resiliency. There is physical resiliency, emotional resiliency, social resiliency, and cognitive resiliency. Let's go through all of these. Let's see how we can improve them. And for that, let's start with physical resiliency. Physical resiliency is the ability to recover, resist, and absorb physical stresses or shock. Examples for physical resiliency are, of course, having proper infrastructure, but also your physical, as the name says, fitness. Now, what can we do to improve our physical resiliency? Well, that's the easiest part. At least to know what to do is the easiest part. To actually do it is quite a lot harder and takes quite a bit of discipline. We have to eat healthy, we have to exercise, we have to sleep well, and we have to have a physical preparedness plan when it comes to defending ourselves or protecting ourselves from natural disasters. The weird thing about physical resiliency is that it is actually that type of resiliency that we might need the least in modern society. I'm not a big fan of outsourcing your own protection or your own preparedness, but the likelihood that you are physically attacked or that there is a physical disaster compared to other stressors like professional stressors, emotional stressors, etc., is very low. Still, physical resiliency is super important because anything that we can do physically with our body is an outlet and a pathway to greater resiliency on an emotional level, on a cognitive level, and also enhances our ability on a social level. So, physical resiliency itself may be not super important, but it is the gateway, the foundation of anything else, and so you should definitely keep care of it. And as already the old Romans said, mens sana in corpore sana, that means a healthy spirit only lives in a healthy body. The second type of resiliency is emotional resiliency. Emotional resiliency is the ability of an individual to cope with emotions and mental stress. And frankly, this is one of the resiliency types when looking back at my time in the military. We really didn't do too good of a job in being emotionally resilient because we dealt in a in a lot of very unhealthy way with this stuff, especially with emotions. And also today, I mean, coping with stress, coping with emotions, right? If your number one route that you're going down is anger, if you get frustrated or if you get stressed, then this is not really resilient. You should be able to stay more or less emotionally calm. Of course, and I feel that I have to say that for the guys, um, staying emotionally calm, being stoic to a certain degree, doesn't mean that we don't feel emotions. If you have emotions, you should still be able to behave according to the standard that you want to behave to, right? Your emotions should not push you past that standard. And everybody who knows me knows my temperament, so I'm dealing with that myself. But it is a very important point. Now, how do we build that emotional resiliency? The first way to get the healthy emotional resiliency is to practice some type of spirituality. And my preferred and recommended way would be to practice Christian spirituality. But if you feel that you just want to call out to the universe and that helps you along, then be my guest. Do whatever is good for you in that regard. I just suggest that maybe look into our Western Christian tradition because we have quite smart people thinking about all that stuff since 6,000 years, if we include the Old Testament. So it might make sense to at least explore that direction before you try to go into Buddhist meditation and become a yogi. The second tip to improve your emotional resiliency is to develop healthy coping mechanisms. We briefly touched on it. Anger is never a good coping mechanism. Yes, there is this thing that we want to be default aggressive and forward going, but there has to be a mechanism with which we can actually absorb our emotions and not be driven by them, but really we are the guys behind the steering wheel. So that can be sport. I mean, you would wonder how much your emotional well-being will improve if you sweat for an hour every day, right? I mean, that's the bare minimum that you should do. Yeah, but as said, healthy coping mechanisms. If you get angry, go for a walk, something like this. Figure something out there. The next tip to build emotional resiliency is actually building a support system. If you're married or in a relationship, then keep in mind that your significant other is not meant to absorb all emotions that you have. My wife once told me, yeah, you have an awful lot of emotions, and she's right there. And I can't burden all my stuff that I'm battling with onto my wife, right? That's not her job as my partner. Yes, she is there for me, but I also have to have friends and former colleagues, etc., to which I can talk and that will understand me, maybe even in a different way than my wife can understand me. So build an emotional support system. For me, as said, are my friends from the shooting range and a lot of former military guys I know, but also the guys, for example, from the fire department. If you run together into a burning building, that really connects and opens up a space for communication. So, yeah, try to get something like that, build it up. It doesn't happen overnight, but it will be greatly beneficial over the long term. And last but not least, I already mentioned it, be open to express your emotions. There is a theory out there regarding PTSD that looked at the greatest generation coming back from the Second World War and compared it to today's veterans. And this is not to throw shade on anybody, but the psychologists they set up the theory that all the guys from the greatest generation, after they fought overseas, they had a quite long transport back to the United States. And during that transport, they had nothing else to do than sit together and talk about the stuff that happened before, right? So they actually, maybe they didn't sit there and said, "Oh yeah, that was hard," but they could talk about stuff that happened to them. And yeah, psychologists assume that this is a big part why, even though there certainly have been extreme cases of PTSD in that generation, um, most of the guys came home quite sane and quite safely. The polar opposite would be, for example, the Vietnam War, where the veterans came back from Vietnam and were basically pushed into a somewhat hostile society. It weren't whole units that deployed and came back, it were single persons, single soldiers. And we know how bad the consequences of the Vietnam War was for the mental states of the people who had to fight there. Of course, again, not for everybody, but for a big part of that. The third part of resiliency is social resiliency. Social resiliency refers to the ability to maintain or establish positive relationships to others, even under stress. What can we do to improve our social resiliency? Well, first, we can learn to communicate better. And we all think that we communicate super clear. We don't. That's just a fact. I'm not good at it. Um, I see people on a daily basis who are not good at it. And that's, I think, one of the most important parts where we can actually improve our social resiliency. In that regard, communicating better also means communicating open and honestly. Um, if you never tell people what bothers you, although in a acceptable way, there we have again the emotional resiliency. So don't scream at people, just talk to them if something upsets you. Then yeah, you will likely not get people to change, and that's very negative on your social resiliency. So that's a big part. The second tip for building social resiliency is to actually get involved in your community. You will not be able to maintain good relationships with people around you if you really only say good morning and goodbye during normal times. it's not very likely they will be there for you, that you will be able to connect with them during hard times or anything that is out of the ordinary. The third point to build social resiliency is actually volunteering. I already mentioned my service in the fire department, and there you can see how the types of resiliency are actually connected to each other, right? But if you move to a new place, volunteering in any type of club, in any type of charitable organization, that might be the fire department, search and rescue for in the mountains, for example, anything like that will get you a lot closer with the community that you are actually in, and you will build a much higher social resiliency. And last but not least, for all our preparedness guys out there, regardless which scenario you're preparing for, right? That might be an EMP, solar storms, blackout, attack by the Chinese, whatever, right? Regardless what happens, the lone wolf will likely not survive. So you need to be integrated in your community as part of your preparedness plan. I myself, I don't have any preparedness plans for the potential apocalypse. I don't think that this is actually on the horizon, but I know that if shit goes sideways, I can rely on a lot of people in my surroundings. I know that I can get all types of food from the farmers we have around here because we are great friends from the fire department. I know that I have always somebody who will help me to fix my roof in a snowstorm, right? All that stuff, firewood, etc. And of course, they know that they can count on me if somebody would try to steal their herd or something like that, right? Get away with their animals. Well, we will catch them. And that's something that gives me a feeling of being prepared for a lot of stuff that I could only barely survive if I would be alone out there. So even for the guys maybe on the more extreme side of preparedness, having a strong community, having a strong society around you is something that is very beneficial. And the fourth type of resiliency is cognitive resiliency. Cognitive resiliency is the ability to keep thinking and keep thinking critically, even under a huge amount of stress. I think it's pretty clear why it is important to have this type of cognitive resiliency. You want to make good decisions, you want to make sober decisions, and yeah, you're not able to do that if your mind is going haywire because something happens out there. Again, we see a connection to emotional resiliency, because if you're overwhelmed by emotions, you're also not able to think clear. But you also want to avoid, even though you're not overwhelmed by emotions, but just under a lot of stress, then you still want to avoid that you lose the ability to think critically. Now, how can we increase our cognitive resiliency? Well, the first thing is we need to develop those critical thinking skills. And we all think that we are critical thinkers. I found it very beneficial to get myself on the internet and read through the most common logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are thinking pattern that humans lean towards, that are actually not rational, but that follow a false logic. The sunken cost fallacy would be something like that. You invested a lot in something that actually doesn't have a lot of outcome, and because you invested a lot already, you tend to invest even more into it. Stuff like that. So look that up. That can be very beneficial and keeps you and your critical thinking in its tracks. The second way to improve your cognitive resiliency is to be open and adaptable to change. I'm pretty conservative to basically anything that is coming up, but it is important to stay open-minded for change, to accept change and maybe go with change, right? A current example for me is all the things around AI and artificial intelligence. I was very reluctant to look into this chat GPT thing, for example. And now, since I used it a little bit, I found it actually quite helpful, a helpful tool for what it is. And you just need to be open to these changes and to new methods, maybe to more creative thinking. The third part, and this is something I see a lot when I'm coaching our junior team members in the office, or also previously, that people shy away from challenges. Of course, nobody wants to run headlong into a challenge and then die, but the everyday challenges that we tend to go out of the way of, we should embrace those challenges, because those challenges are the training ground where we can practice critical thinking while we are under pressure. And that's something that we don't get very often, because you can only simulate stress to a certain degree. And yes, you can do it with physical activities, but it's still not the same as real cognitive stress. So yeah, embrace challenges. And again, last but not least, I always found after action reports to be very helpful. So think what you just did, how something went, and then draw your conclusions. We could also say learn from your mistakes, but not only learn from your mistakes, also learn from what went well and what worked. And that way you will be a more well-rounded thinker. And if you get into the habit of actually just briefly analyzing after an evening with friends, hey, what went well, could I have done better? After a business meeting, after you wrote a letter, etc. In the beginning, it's a little bit of work, but it will greatly improve your ability to think critically, think quickly, and get to the right conclusions. Okay, now those were the 4 pillars of resiliency according to modern military doctrine. Again, we have physical resiliency, we have emotional resiliency, we have social resiliency, and we have cognitive resiliency. All of these are important, all of these are connected, and all of these need practice until you actually get good at them. Now, I think we all agree that it is definitely worth it, and we all agree that it is a journey. I have by no means arrived at the destination, but I try to go a step further every day. I hope so do you. Yeah, with that, I hope you found this video helpful. I really appreciate the time you spent watching it. Remember to follow the channel. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments below. Otherwise, again, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.